please. Okay, colleagues, welcome to today's concurrent meeting for the Committee for the Economy and with the Committee for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs. We have attendance from both committees. Do we have any apologies?
From Sinead and Anya Murphy.
Perfect, no problem at all. Any member of any declaration of interest they may wish to declare at this stage?
No, I'm with BT.
I'm a Fibrus customer.
You're a Fibrus customer, no problem. Chairperson's business, none. Okay, Fibrus Networks, I'm delighted to welcome along here today. So with us we have Dominic Kearns, who's CEO, been known to many, Jenny, who's the Managing Director of Networks at Fibrus, and Shane, the Chief Operating Officer. You are very, very welcome along here today. I just declare that I've previously met with Fibrus in a party capacity, just in terms of getting an update on the work that they had been doing, and I welcome that engagement and thank you for providing the update at that stage. Not as my role as chair, but as I made clear then, I'm very proud of the role that our party has played in securing the funding to have the rollout of this project, and without it our rural communities wouldn't have access to the internet that they have today, so thank you for delivering that contract. I know this has been a very difficult time for both your customers and both for you as a company, but we're very happy to have you here today and hand over to your capable hands.
Okay. Look, just to thank you again, more than happy to be here to speak to you today. I suppose I'll just go straight into my remarks. When Fibrus was founded 5 years ago, our sole purpose was to bring communities, homes and businesses a broadband service that was fit for everyday demands. And for years they were promised better, but it took our creation to create the necessary competition to deliver what we have today, at close to nearly 100% coverage across the region. Fibrus today looks a lot different than the ambition we had 5 years ago. Today we've built our network to over 400,000 premises across NI and Cumbria, attracted inward investment of £500 million and are now serving 110,000 customers. In 2020, through Project Stratum, we were awarded £182 million to subsidise the build of a new full fibre network to 80,000 homes and businesses who for years had gone with nothing. This project has been transformational for those living rurally, and I'm very pleased and proud of the fact that we are on time with delivery as compared to previous contracts, and most importantly within budget. Given that Stratum properties are in really hard to reach areas, our infrastructure is predominantly overhead and utilises open-reach duct and pole infrastructure. We are mandated to do so to ensure efficient use of public money, speed of delivery and protection of the environment that we work in. Ideally, this network would be underground, but the cost to do so does not meet the current value for money guardrails for the taxpayer. In January, the island of Ireland faced an unprecedented storm, the worst storm of a generation. Our response to this was the largest telecoms repair mission ever seen here. At the peak of the storm, around 40,000 customers were without broadband. Of those, 2/3 were impacted by power and 13,000 were impacted by fibre damage. Our ability to restore service in the early stages relied heavily on NIE restoring their network and collaboration with Openreach to fix theirs. NIE provide the fuel to provide the power to fuel our network, and 80% of our build utilises Openreach infrastructure. We have forged excellent relationships with both those agencies at an operational and senior level, and I would extend my thanks to their teams for the cooperation during our respective responses. On day one, we initiated our storm response plan, mobilising more than 700% of our usual maintenance team capacity within 2 days. We strategically focused on high volume faults, restoring service to 5,500 customers in week one. Our restoration efforts continued at pace as we worked closely with those we had dependencies on. Much has been made of the telecommunications response compared to that of the electricity network. This is unfair and does not reflect the realities that exist. On the island, there is one electricity network, north and south, owned by the same entity. whereas there were at least 4 rural telecoms networks that sustained major damage and who were all vying for the same resource. Added to this, fibre networks are more complex in their nature and take longer to repair. In relation to our communication with customers, we acknowledge that in the early stages of the storm, effective communication was challenging due to the dynamic nature of the storm recovery. Once NIE restored full power, we had a clear understanding of the network damage, and we immediately shared estimated restoration dates with affected customers and kept them informed of any changes. We also ensured that elected representatives and stakeholders were kept informed throughout the restoration process. When we had a clear picture of the damage on a constituency level, we met with political parties to discuss our response. Since then, we have been sending regular constituency-focused communications twice weekly to illustrate our progress. Our communications have always been forthcoming and transparent. However, we do accept the feedback that we have had from many of you and our customers that the frequency of information and a better explanation of what we were encountering could have been shared. Many of our customers will not be aware of our dependencies, and we intend to publicise this more clearly in the future. We absolutely recognise the inconvenience to our customers. In particular, we understand the impact it has for those that went without for years, having changed their lives, and for many, their working arrangements off the back of our service. This interruption to their service was not of our doing, but in line with the values we have as a business, we offered a compensation scheme, which was further enhanced for those without broadband after the 17th of February. I'm incredibly proud of the teams across all our departments in our business. I'm also very proud of the fact that within 4 weeks of the storm, we had fixed all faults on our access network and returned to business as usual maintenance volumes. Finally, I've initiated an internal post-incident review of the response to the storm to identify areas we can learn from in terms of the scale and severity of what we experienced. Following that, we will update our ongoing storm response plan, and we'll continue to collaborate and update the Department of the Economy and the ECRRG with any improvements we have made. Thank you.
Very much, Dominic, for that. And as I said at the start, I do appreciate you meeting with political parties. I know certainly our meeting was robust, but we certainly would not fall out over these things, and they're important, and I understand the pressures on both customers and you as an organisation. In terms of current customer outages, do you have an idea how many there currently are and you're working on at the minute?
At the minute we have 62 customers that are out of service since the storm. They're single customer faults, so we require access to their properties, or we require the OpenReach infrastructure to be repaired, and we're working closely with OpenReach on a daily basis. Or in fact we can't get in contact with them customers. Could be holiday homes and they're not going to be available until the summer period, and we're working closely with them. We've got the visits scheduled for those that we can.
No problem. And then in terms of, I know you launched a compensation scheme. Have you begun to process those and push those out the door, or is that an ongoing process?
Yes, we absolutely have began that process. I suppose if I could maybe start with chatting about the environment in which compensation is implemented. Within the Stratum contract, there is provision for restoration of services, and the SLAs that we work to are in relation to 88% of all faults restored within a 2-day period, and 97% of faults restored within a 5-day period. Obviously, during a storm scenario, you will appreciate that it's very, very difficult to maintain those SLAs, and in cases we haven't been able to do that. The other thing that I would say is that there also is provision within the Stratum contract to deal with events such as this, force majeure events, such as flood, storm. But we as Fibrus made the decision that we wouldn't trigger those events effectively with DFE and with BDUK, and instead, be on the side of the customers, understanding the difficulties that they are seeing in relation to the broadband service outages. So we made a decision that we would choose the higher end of the SLA, so that's the 2-day and not the 2 working day environment where we would trigger compensation. When a customer's power is restored, we would then basically start paying at £5 a day for residential customers. And for those business customers that are impacted, we also understand the impact that it's had at a business level. Those customers that are on the business package, we would pay £10 per day.
Thank you so much. Chairman of the Agriculture Committee.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for attending the meeting today. It's really useful, and to put the two committees together, I think will add value. I've got two questions, if that's okay. I'll ask the first one, and it's in regard to an assessment, if it has been carried out, in terms of the impact on rural dwellers, and has there been a post-incident assessment done to try and assess the quantitative piece of those that were affected, and if it did disproportionately affect rural dwellers, which I suspect it possibly did have for historical reasons. Part of that question then is, will that form part of the emergency plan and response then to mitigate impact on rural dwellers?
Yeah, so we've kicked that post-incident review off internally. Shane's leading that internally. The fact is that most of the customers that were affected were in rural areas, and the reason for that is that most of those customers are serviced by overhead connections. Many of the routes to their properties are serviced via poles, so that was the area of the network that was susceptible to the most damage, and where we had to concentrate our efforts in responding to. Sorry, the second part of your question was?
I was sort of it's probably in the work that you're getting to with regard to Shane's piece, which is how we change that dynamic. And the reason that I'm asking is because in the whole government approach of trying to keep people at home and out of hospitals and stuff, people inevitably will be at greater risk in rural areas because they're further away from hospitals, and if they don't have electricity and they don't have either data or broadband, the risk is greater. So therefore, collectively, we have to look at ways that we can mitigate that risk and reduce it. And just looking to see if you guys are in that space.
Yeah. So in relation to looking at other technologies that could be deployed in a situation where the broadband service isn't available, there are a number of strands that we're currently looking at. So obviously, we're exploring the 4G, 5G backup type scenario. However, in rural communities, I'm sure you'll appreciate, upwards of 25% of rural dwellers don't have mobile coverage, so that's not a complete end-to-end solution. So as well as that, we're looking at other technologies that potentially we could implement for customers in the event that the broadband services is no longer available. I think it's also fair to say that from a build perspective, typically overhead connectivity is the only means of connecting these communities. In other words, there is no other way of delivering services to those customers. So from our perspective, it's really all about how we mobilise and how we can respond to deliver those fixes as quickly as possible, and that will be absolutely part of our post-incident review.
As I said in my opening remarks, ideally this network would be below the ground and we wouldn't be sitting having this conversation. But we've looked at that detailed internally. It costs 10 to 12 times what it costs today to build it overhead, to do it underground. So as you can see, it falls well outside the value for money from a taxpayer point of view.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And my next one kind of leads on from that. What was probably good to see, and most people around the country will agree that sort of the gold command structure worked well, and that's fine. But are you involved in any similar joint agency review, that you're not being left on your own to review it? Because as you've rightly pointed out, you are dependent on NIE for power to power the broadband, etc., etc. And in those discussions then, is there an element of it, again, going back to that future proofing then, so that everybody's pulling in the same direction?
So maybe if I just begin with, obviously, the other dependencies that we have initially. Obviously, we have excellent working relationships in place with Openreach. We've mentioned earlier, 80% of our network basically connects via Openreach infrastructure across NI. At a senior management level and an ops level, those relationships are already in place and worked extremely well during the course of the response. In terms of NIE, we have the same similar measures in place at a senior management level. I was speaking to senior management within NIE on a daily basis, and in fact, we actually coordinated in the first week very closely with NIE, where we were basically following where NIE were going to restore services, so that we could then tailor our response to maximise the amount of customers that could be brought back. Outside of that, obviously, we've been working with the ECRRG, the Electronic Communications Response Resource Group, as well as DFE and the civil contingencies through the Executive Office. As part of our internal post-incident review, we have fed in to the ECRRG a few weeks ago in terms of some of our initial findings and some of the things that we need to focus on, obviously, going forward. And that will be something that we'll take forward as we come out of this post-incident review.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks to you all for coming here today and for outlining, I suppose, the work that you have done. Can I say at the very outset that I completely understand the challenges that you are facing, the rurality of your service. I'm a rural representative from Mid-Ulster. An awful lot of my constituents are your customers, and they're your customers because they didn't have reliable broadband up until the implementation of Project Stratum, and it has been transformative. And what, I suppose, don't declare an interest as such, but there's Fibrus in my home house. My mum is a Fibrus customer and couldn't be happier with the service. When it works, it is brilliant. People that didn't have good internet now have brilliant internet. But there's a consistent theme with a problem when there's a breakage or a disconnection in getting that restored. And I have to say, the bit that you've said there around the communication, absolutely, the meetings with ourselves. I see Julian here, he's brilliant, always responds, comes back, we have that contact, but an awful lot of the time you feel like you're getting an acknowledgement as opposed to an answer, and it can be very, very frustrating for people. Now, some of my constituents only came back on last Wednesday. There were 31 days without Fibrus broadband. I would preface that by saying, or give, I suppose, context to it by saying that I also had one Openreach customer that wasn't back on until Sunday. So they were the lower of the league in terms of Mid-Ulster. But widespread, you know, I had families, you maybe had 3 or 4 siblings living up the same lane, and 2 of them had switched to Fibrus, and 2 of them had stayed with BT or Sky, whoever it was, and they were back on a week or 10 days earlier than the others. And it's just that frustration that people feel, and why are we not being dealt with here? And I suppose my assessment of it is around that you've referred there to the staff and resource on the ground and that ability that you're all vying for the same group of people. Is that what is causing the problem? Is it the workforce on the ground, or where is the delay, or what's the?
You can cover the
I can cover
yeah.
that. So in terms of our response, I think any operator that faced into Storm Eowyn will call out that it was an unprecedented situation. We weren't readily available. We didn't have the resource that we all required. However, we were underpinned because we do have exclusivity to our build and maintenance supplier, Fibre Optics. We also have continuity plan within the supply chain across GB and ANI. And as well as that, we were able to access resources through our Infracapital group, as well as enacting dual roles. So from day one, we initiated the storm response. And across the 2 days, so the Saturday and the Sunday, we had uplifted our capacity, our normal maintenance capacity, by 700%. So at any given time, we had 300 resources in the field restoring the service, supported by a circa of 200 desk-based resources that were helping coordinate that response. I think what Dominic's called out in his opening statement was there was 4 rural telco providers across the island of Ireland that were facing into this storm, and we all needed access to the same resource. Fibre networks tend to be a bit more complex to restore, just in sheer nature of how they're built and the fact that they're in rural areas, and that the engineers working within them networks need to have the skills and training required to work in the architecture that the service provider uses. I say we were underpinned. If we had an option to get more resources, we would have taken more resources. But unfortunately, that wasn't an option that it was available to us. We had exhausted all the avenues that we had. To put it in the context, we replaced 870 kilometres of cable across a 4-week period. That would normally take us 7 to 8 months to build in any programme. And today we're proud of the fact that we are the first telco provider that is faced in this storm that is back to BAU storm levels. But as part of our post-incident review, Emma, we will be taking away how do we access the resources that we require that would speed up our response. The nature of our our network is also very complex in terms of the reliance on power. We can't see the fibre fault until the power comes on, and as well the second and third damages that you only see when you test the network, and then you'd need to do secondary and third truck rolls in. And then the final aspect is the customer, the individual customer faults. So we do, we do have an underpinned continuity plan, but given that that was such an unprecedented storm, I think any operator would say they would have benefited from additional resources had they been available.
And then just specifically on your question around the communication, Emma, if I can say, so like in terms of what we have, in terms of rolling out a response from a crew point of view, we also have a communication plan, as you would expect, as part of that response as well. And previously, no different than NIE or OpenReach or whoever, we've all experienced certain length of or certain severities of storms, so we all have an assumption on how long it will take us to get out, and our communication plan was designed for that time length. This time we had a situation where for 7 days we had the electricity network not fully restored, so that prolonged our ability to get out to the customers to tell them exactly what was happening and when we would get to them. And there's nothing more frustrating from a customer point of view, and we recognise that, and we've taken that feedback. What we will be doing in the future, if something as severe like this hits again, is that we'll be explaining to our customers the dependencies that we have to be able to get to them. You know, we have customers that do ring us when their power is off, asking why their broadband isn't working. You know, those situations do happen because, particularly for people that haven't had it before and have waited for so long, it's a very emotional subject for them because it's so critical to their house. And then all sense kind of goes out the window at that stage. So we accept that, and we're going to tailor our communications plan now for storms of this severity and keep customers as updated as we can. You know, we can't tell them everything about our fix, but the most important thing for us is when they're going to be fixed, and if that changes, notifying them of that as well.
Thanks. So I suppose what I'm getting there from you is that it's the added complexity of your particular type of network that it takes longer then to repair it, and then you need a particularly skilled workforce in order to do that. And so it's helpful to get that explanation, because I suppose that was our sense of it on the ground. And I totally appreciate what you're saying around trying to give people an estimation. We had that actually a week or a fortnight earlier with the NIE, where they were telling people, you know, such an date. The problem seemed to be that they were given an estimated restoration date of like the 30th, and most people, it was back on with the 28th, whereas I was finding Fibrus 13th, 17th, 21st, 24th, and then you were getting more and more frustration.
And we do have an explanation for that, Emma. The electricity network, one joint can bring up tens of thousands of customers. With us, you know, we could be going to 20 customers in a rural area that we joint, and then the next thing on further down there's another secondary or tertiary fault. So we get that, and I think that's important to understand that context when we're talking about response and recovery times.
I appreciate that. I suppose if I could there's just two more things around, because that's what I was saying, this seems to be, and this is the general feedback that we're getting from constituents, that when it works, it is brilliant. The price point is brilliant for people. They have no complaints in that regard, but that it takes longer to restore, and even installation. I had a constituent on to me at the weekend who had switched to Fibrus before Christmas, had been told the 5th of December there was some problem, then it was maybe the 11th of December, then it was some date in January, then it was the end of January, it was supposed to be last Monday, the team didn't show up. When she contacted Fibrus, they didn't know that the subcontractor hadn't turned up. So it's all feeding into that sort of like independability of the...
Look, I could probably guess the way that particular customer experienced that, because don't forget we had Storm Dara in December as well. Now that took us half the time to recover from that, and during that period of time we switch all of our resources onto the recovery of the network, so installations do get paused. So we were actually had just recovered and into the new year and ready to get back to installing our customers, and then this happened.
It might have been a contractor that was doing the installation here, and that I'm not sure. So, no, I appreciate that, and I might touch base with Julian about that specific
Yeah, do so, yeah.
And then the other thing I just wanted to touch on very briefly, it was around the compensation. I know you've outlined there, Shane, around, you know, that it's a goodwill payment, and I take that on board. And I know we've had that communicated to us. We had a party meeting with yourselves as well. But I suppose there's a lot of frustration from people, like you outlined there, Don, like people who didn't have internet and then maybe switched to work from home, and maybe children doing coursework and all these different things, and they had to find alternative means for the period where they had no internet. And that amount of £5 a day for an awful lot of people isn't actually compensating what they're out financially in terms of the period that their internet was off. So I suppose more just to, I know that this is something we've flagged with you, and it's just I suppose disappointing, but hopefully I appreciate the learning that has undergone during this period, and hopefully the next time we have, and please God, it's far in the future, that things might be more straightforward afterwards.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. John.
Thank you, Chair. We seem to have established that the proliferation of overhead cables have contributed probably significantly to the problem, and also to the capacity to deal with the problem. Now, I had raised the increase of the number of overhead cables some time ago from a constituency point of view, and it wasn't just around aesthetics and visual amenity and character of our rural areas, but also at the time the issue of susceptibility to damage was raised. So in light of that, and given that we've established there's a direct link between the number of overhead cables and the amount of damage, can I ask if any assessment or comparison has been done to damage during previous storms, albeit storms that may not have been as severe in the first instance, and also then, perhaps more importantly, the costs of the repairs in comparison to any savings there might have been installing these overhead cables, because this is likely to be a repeated event in the future.
Mm-hmm. Well, taking the last point, and then Jenny, you can come in with the rest. But in terms of the overall cost, as I said earlier, the overall cost to build the stratum networks around, for rough sake, £200 million, including our own contribution. We've done an assessment that it would cost at least 10 times to put that underground. So that, I suppose, is ruled out straight away. In terms of the cost of this to our business, that we're looking at £5 million of cost to recover this, and this is something that you know we didn't expect to have to subsidise, but it's part and parcel of rural networks. And if we could have a scenario where particular, and we've raised actually this with the Minister when we met her, if there's areas where there's particularly vulnerable customers, or there's particular stretches that there's large amounts of customers come off, if there was budget to be able to put some of that underground, that might impact the damage or might deal with some of the impact in future storms. So we have looked at that.
Yeah, I think as you called out, it's an overhead network, and in most cases, that's the only way of providing service, so it is going to be susceptible to damage. We do have a proactive asset assurance team that complete quality checks on the infrastructure, and post this storm, we are completing a quality check across the network to identify if there are any vulnerabilities, and as Dominic says, welcome the discussions for opportunities to add resilience in there. In addition to that, we're heavily engaged with the Telecoms Authority to look at how we implement SLAs into the passive infrastructure product that we use belonging to Openreach. At the minute, there are no SLAs in place, and we would welcome the introduction of them that would help us restore service and give customers, I suppose, a more clear understanding of when they'll be restored.
For clarity, my math isn't great, but what you're saying is, and I know that this is the point that some people have put out previously in relation to overhead cable, that would have cost $2 billion rather than the 200 million that we're...
Yeah.
Do you want anything else, sir?
No, I think that covers it. Perhaps other than, do we know the proportion of the areas where you might consider putting in some, you mentioned there that there might be consideration of putting in underground cables where there are more customers or more potential for damage. Do you know what proportion of the network that is?
That'll be an output of the quality check that we complete. We haven't completed that yet, and we'll be sitting down with the Department of Economy and see if that's a welcome suggestion.
Yeah, so it'd be a mixture, John, of the work that we'll do within the post-incident review and take into account the damages that we've seen from previous storms, look for commonality, and then identify the locations that you would then, I suppose, review with a view to making potential changes if the funding is available.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. I suppose probably at an earlier meeting I did put on record my frustrations and indeed those of the constituents, and I was glad to see that a lot of the issues that were raised were addressed. In particular, I think the elected representatives' email really did make a change in terms of our constituency offices dealing with some of the particulars. So thank you for that. Jenny, did you mention 63 in total? Was that, did I think?
63 customers
that are still
out
out.
of service.
Do you have a breakdown of where they are constituency-wide?
I do.
Want me to go through, Jenny?
Yeah, do you have it handy?
Yeah, so as of this morning, I'll just run down through each of the constituencies,
Good.
if that's okay. So East Antrim, we've 0 faults. East Londonderry, 2 faults. Fermanagh, South Tyrone, 29. Nunn and Foyle, Legan Valley, 5. Mid Ulster, 4. Newry and Armagh, 5. North Antrim, 1. None in North Down or South Antrim. 2 in South Down. 6 in Strangford. 1 in Upper Bann. And 7 in West Tyrone.
Okay, and have you a breakdown of the number of businesses contained in those 63? How many are business
I
customers?
don't have that
There
information.
are 4 business customers.
Four business.
Okay, no, that's fine. Look, as I said, that particularly containing to my own constituency, there was quite a bit of engagement back and forward with the elected reps line on particular customers, and I'm glad we're now down to one. I would just probably say, and I'm not going to labour on the point, but are you confident? And obviously, there's, we're lessons learned essentially, but would you have confidence, and could you give this committee the assurance that if indeed we do see an occurrence like this again, that Fibrus, to excuse the pun, have the structural bandwidth to be able to deal with this in the future?
I suppose what I would say straight away is back to what I said earlier. We have a plan to respond to a storm, and that was based on our previous experiences and what others had experiences too. Our organisation is full of people who've worked in telecoms for years, so we brought all that knowledge together. And back to the storm in December, a couple of weeks we were through that storm, and that was in line with our response plan. The severity of this one caught us all on the hop, and what we had to do, to use the term, we had to get our black books out and get through all the contractors that we could to see who had the resource. And I was happy and satisfied we'd done that reasonably well. But what we will do straight away now is start to formalise those relationships with the people we were able to bring in from GB to help us, the contractors, that skilled resource that we needed. We'll formalise that now so that we have the resource in place, contracted to deal with a storm of this severity again.
And finally, from me, what is the process of prioritisation for Fibrus? So, look, I think it's very easy to say, look, if a fault is easier fixed, it'll be prioritised, it'll happen quicker. But in particular with cases where perhaps we have medical issues, I know I did have one of those in particular, how does that factor into prioritisation in terms of trying to fix a fault as opposed to a wider issue?
Yeah, so obviously in the first week, Johnny, the big focus was on maximising the damages so we could bring as many customers back as possible. But to answer the question in relation to vulnerable customers or businesses that needed to be prioritised, obviously dealing with vulnerable customers first and foremost. If we know of a vulnerable customer, then we will prioritise that customer. If it's possible to restore that customer outside of a larger fault. If the customer is impacted with the fault, it's very difficult for us to do that. So they'll have to be delivered and restored as part of that fix. As well as that, we have provisions in place for how we deal with vulnerable customers, with hearing impairments and mobility issues and so on and so forth. But in relation to businesses, we've got 2 levels that we operate at a business level. So we've got your standard sort of business, and then you've got enhanced business SLA effectively, which at the minute is run a 24-hour SLA for restoration of services, what we aim to in a BAU form. Where we can prioritise that business, we absolutely will. And if I just hark back to the elected reps DL that we set up, that's been a big success. Over 300 queries have come through that. Over 65 different MLAs, councillors that have utilised that to date, and we have prioritised where we can bring those businesses and vulnerable customers back.
Thank you. Next, Chair.
Yep, thank you for that. Thank you for attending. Just by the way, a number of councillors have said to me that their email bounced back because they were told it was for MPs and MLAs. Just to correct you there. Thank you for that. Now, you mentioned there your repair work. How much of your repair work is subbied out? What percentage?
So we are, as Jenny said earlier, we're underpinned by our own contractor, Patsy, first and foremost. Would you be able to put a percentage on it?
I wouldn't have the percentage of it, but our main provider is through fibre optics, which we have exclusive access to for maintenance and build.
But certainly in terms of the response, that was mainly made up of subcontractors, more over and above what the resource we had within our own contractor.
And well, maybe if you could provide me a wee bit more detail on that, because this seems to be the nub of it. Did you have difficulty getting subcontractors to fulfil the work?
No, so the different levers that we had was enacting our business continuity plan with fibre optics was the lever number one. Then we have a wider supply chain that we utilise across NI and GB. So we enacted their business continuity plan. And then the access to our infra capital group, if they had resources available, we mobilised them from GB.
I'm trying to determine at what point did you have your business service user plan? At what point did you say, look, we need to go out here and get further subbies in? How far into?
That was from day one.
Straight away.
That was from day one. We
away.
mobilised resources on the Sunday post the storm.
Back to my original question, were you having difficulty getting those subbies?
No, we didn't have difficulty getting the subbies. As we explored, as we tested the network and there was additional faults found, we made a decision in week 2 to increase the resource profile as we tested the networks and found further damages that was on scene, and we mobilised further resources through our known supply chain.
To be fair, to be completely accurate about this, Patsy, on the island we have a number of well-proven contractors who were spread really thin across other contractors. So on the island it was difficult to get access to the resource, so that's why we had to turn our attention to getting resources from GB. And it's fair to say we didn't have much issue there. Whenever we contacted contractors, there was available resource and we took whatever we could.
Maybe just ask how far in post-storm you were before that contact would have been made.
Straight away.
Weeks, days?
Straight away. Over the weekend, Jenny and her team were contacting anybody that we could through our existing supply chain and GB. We have a contract that's ongoing in Cumbria, and we went through them primarily to get access to all the subcontractors.
Just to get it clear, you had them available to you within a couple of days of realising that if you like, the whole works pool network there of engineers within the island of Ireland had been already absorbed, yes?
We had made contact and agreed, and then within 5 days we had most of that resource in Belfast, and you know, straight away, as we've said before, our priority straight away is making sure then people have the adequate training, health and safety training before they go accessing our network, and we did that. That was a priority for us, and they were operational within 5-6 days. I would say.
Operational within circa 5 days. As Dominic says, we had to do the induction period. We'd mobilise them from GB, do the induction period. Put in the context, the first week of the storm, we restored 5.7 thousand customers. The second week, we restored 4,000 customers. And at that stage, we realised that the damage in the network was further in. It was more rural and hard to reach. And how we wanted to keep momentum is we then increased the profile again by increasing splicing and testers in the end of week 2, and that helped us keep the momentum of our storm recovery.
How many personnel would that have involved who are actually
in the field?
Mechanically in the field, engineers doing the repairs? 300
field resources at any given time doing the repairs.
In the field? Yes. Okay, thank you for that. Can it come back to the customer service, because this is where a lot of people, including your customers, were having serious difficulties. They couldn't get through, number one, and indeed one of our councillors spent 1 hour on the phone and could not get through. She was both a customer and making representations on behalf of constituents. The second element to that is whenever they did get through, they were being provided, I just read the email there from one of your customers, false information as to when the engineer would turn up, and if another case, in fact, it's up near Draperstown, where the same thing was happening, where people were being told the engineer will be with you tomorrow, and one of it's recorded, it went through your offices there. They were being told the engineer's calling out tomorrow, and then they get a text message, no, it won't be calling out tomorrow, and this was running into the 5th week. So, are you conducting a review of your comm system whereby, number one, people can get through? Now, I accept there'll be thousands of people making phone calls in the first day or so, but NIE seems to have grappled with that pretty well to get people through and to get people talking and to at least get them information. And number two, that the information that is provided to people is accurate and reliable. Now, I realise sometimes things can happen, but whenever you're seeing a bit of a pattern of this, where clearly the person who is receiving the phone call from the customer either doesn't know or is given the perception after 2 or 3 attempts that they're making it up, what are you doing to rectify that? Because that's all about customer confidence. That's all about making sure that people are assured, look, if the engineer is saying he's going to come tomorrow at 2 o'clock, that engineer will be here tomorrow at 2 o'clock. I'll not get a text saying it'll be the following day at 3 o'clock, and then I'll not get a recovery email or a recovery text message to say, no, they'll be there on Friday.
So, I'll just take the first point I would make, Patsy, is for the first week of the storm was when we got our most volume of customer calls. Within that period, we still hadn't estimated complete our connection dates for many of our customers because there were still power outages, and only when we had a full picture did we start to communicate those dates. Now, that would have been a huge frustration for customers in that first week.
Just to clarify, Dominic, this is running into the 3rd, 4th and 5th week.
Well, that shouldn't have been the case, because after that first week, our service people had exactly the estimated restoration date of every single customer, and that should have been communicated to them, Patsy. So I'm not sure how that has happened. Some of those dates did change, as we've discussed. Once we fix a fault, all our faults appear, and those did change. And any time a customer's date did change, we communicated that to them. So
that's what's happening, to be fair. You know.
So I'll take that feedback.
There's a sharpening up needs, and you're aware of it. Your comms people are aware of it over there.
Yeah.
There's definitely a sharpening up needs to be done there. We can all learn lessons,
yeah.
And indeed following the suggestions about the elected reps email. That was a good suggestion, but there clearly are voids and gaps there, and that does undermine confidence.
I get that, and what we can do at that point is provide an estimated date. What we find is customers want to know exactly, who's on their road, what they're doing, what the fix is, and that becomes the frustration of the customer.
To be clear, a specific time and date was given that the engineer was called out, was going to be out repeatedly. Specific time, including a text message. But anyway, that all was referred through to yourselves there. It's a learning curve for yourselves, and I appreciate a difficult storm, but all of us can learn from it. Yeah. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome this morning. And it's good to see you here. I know it's been a roller coaster of a few months by this stage. And thank you to Shane and Julian, who we've engaged with, the Ulster Unionist Party has engaged with in the course of all of this. I just wanted to touch on a couple of things, and there's maybe three questions I wanted to ask quickly. First of all, cost. You've indicated it cost 5 million to carry out the repairs. Customers are asking me, will they see a rise in their bills going forward? To recoup this, will this be something can that be communicated to customers to give more confidence? And in terms of retention of customers, so vitally important. Secondly, the post-incident review. will it also take into account capturing and updating vulnerable customers who you've identified now? Because I think that was a very important element of this, that the need to, people had needed their equipment and needed to be able to obviously, with their medical conditions, have internet capacity. And also the rural impact. I know the model of recovery was to target the areas of, widespread, to capture where the crews can go in and repair. But in particular, Clogher Valley, a number of small businesses there, that really had to carry out the transactions, had to go and put extra leads in or carry their phones out to get a signal. And they felt particularly let down that they couldn't operate their businesses with the interruption, and also had to purchase additional mobile data, and wondered, they're asking me, will they get compensated for the cost? And Emma, you touched on that earlier, just the cost of their own resources to try and get connectivity. And I'm sorry there's still 29 in Fermanagh. I know Fermanagh South Tyrone has its own challenges, and I really hope that it can be communicated that possibly these are homeowners, holiday homeowners, in order to give you resumption of service, that put out some sort of messaging and communication to them to really be able to have 100% restoration. Yeah. Thank you.
At this stage, those 29, we know exactly what the circumstance is. As Jenny said, there's kind of three categories. Customers that have already been scheduled because of their own arrangements, we've had to accommodate them, which is fine. Customers that we can't get in contact with for whatever reason, holiday homes, etc. And then lastly, waiting on those specific OpenReach fixes that we need. But we know exactly those 29 customers, and we'll do that. We'll communicate directly with them. So there's a few things there. So compensation for vulnerable customers. Shane, you want to take?
Yeah, so I'll take the vulnerable customer question. So in terms of vulnerable customers and how we deal with it, typically is generated from the customer. So the customer will tell us that they're vulnerable. We put the provision in place. However, with the elected reps deal that we put in place, we actually were able to add customers that were vulnerable to the system and obviously prioritise them as much as possible. Going forward, we also updated the website to enable users to come on and add their family members if they are vulnerable. One of the key learnings, I guess, within the PAR is we review every part of our response, from customer comms right the whole way through the response itself, as well as how we deal with customers and how we communicate with customers. That'll be all included within our post-incident review, and we're keen for to implement any of those continual service improvements as we see them.
And just to address your question about the rise in bills, no is the answer. Our pricing will remain the same. It's an unfortunate situation for us to have this cost, but it's part and parcel of where we live, and I think we're all expecting that things probably won't change that much. We just hope the severity of the storms that do come again don't be as bad as this one.
And just going back on the customers buying additional data, can they expect compensation for that?
So no, our compensation scheme, as outlined, is what our compensation scheme is. Important point of this is that, and I know we've been asked the question why we don't sign up to the Ofcom automatic scheme, and there's actually a reason for that. Jenny touched on it earlier. The product that we consume from OpenReach does not have any specific SLAs around it, and that's something we're trying to work with the regulator to get fixed, both from an SLA point of view and also a price point of view. But anybody that's declared on that automatic compensation scheme, the products that they purchase from OpenReach have specific SLAs and credits associated with them. So they have the ability to back that off. If that was to be in place for us in terms of the products we purchase from OpenReach, we would be on that scheme. So that's why we decided to run our own. And I haven't heard of any other ISP publicly saying how they're going to compensate their customers. And back to what I said earlier, in line with the values of our business, we've been out and said, here's what we're prepared to compensate, even though we have nothing to fall back on.
Thank you. Declan McAleer.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks very much for your presentation. A lot of what had been noted here has been covered, but anyhow, I think that a lot of the customers and constituents that we represent are very, very isolated people. And I think it would be important for Fibrus to have a vulnerable customers register and find a way to communicate with them. Like, I know, for example, during the storm, NIE, for example, came to Oma Leisure Centre and met customers face to face. And I think that is something I think is really important, that perhaps that you could factor into your review. Also looking at the radio and the local press as well to try and reach people who are completely vulnerable and cut off. I think that would be important. Another thing where possible as well, and this could feed into the vulnerable customer register as well, is that I think the Fibrus should look where possible to providing alternatives like 4G or 5G hubs in situations where people are cut off.
Yeah, we've looked at that, Declan. As Shane said, we're reviewing all technologies, but in particular when it comes to mobile, unfortunately the customers that need our service often have an issue with their mobile coverage as well. So look, we're looking at all the technologies in the round. There's satellite, there's low orbit solutions, and there's 5G, 4G solutions as well. We're working with our vendor Amazon. Aero provides us with the technology, the in-house technology. Other providers you will see have like a backup SIM within their router, but that only works where there's decent mobile coverage. So we're going to consider all of that, Declan, as part of this review, and in particular vulnerable customers will be at the centre of that. In terms of moving forward.
Yeah, and just to follow on from the point initially when I was chatting about compensation, Declan, we've worked closely with Ofcom to understand what the mobile coverage, the data mobile coverage map looks like across NI. And if we take into account the impact of the storm and those that were impacted, nearly 25% of those have no mobile data coverage. So straight away, that technology is not going to be fit for purpose across the board. So hence why we're looking at alternative technologies as a means to keep people up and running in the event the storm occurs.
And just finally, Chair, have you experienced a situation where, like, there's a number of different agencies involved when a crisis happens? Have you experienced situations where no one will take the lead? Because I have a number of situations where where a tree has fallen on the line, and I've notified yourselves, BT and DFA about it, but no one takes responsibility, and the tree's still there. I can't identify who the landowner is, so situations you just let the tree hang there until the line breaks and there's an outage and the roads are blocked. Because I find that a bit frustrating, and there's a number of incidents like that in my constituency.
I can only think of two scenarios, Declan, where we wouldn't automatically intervene to deal with that tree ourselves. One, if the road was closed by the Department of Infrastructure, which happened a lot in this storm, because of fallen trees, they had to close the road. That would be one issue. But and then in particular with this storm as well, see if there's live power close to our network, or that's touching trees or whatever, we just won't go near that, because we need that to be made safe first before we can do repairs to it. So them's probably the only two scenarios that we wouldn't automatically intervene and take that tree away from the network. In times of crisis, you just get stuck in and get trees dealt with. But them would be the only scenarios that we probably wouldn't.
I think it goes without saying that we're very thankful for, especially the operators out on the ground, risking life and limb during very difficult situations to get the network, and that goes for NIE and all the other services as well. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
William Eowyn, if broadcasting could turn on William Eowyn's microphone.
You're still muted.
No sound.
Broadcasting. I'll go to you, David, and then hopefully when broadcasting turn on William.
Listen, thank you. Thanks for coming in. Appreciate you actually coming in front of a committee. It's not the easiest thing to do. And also thanks from Alliance for Shane and Julian. And Jenny was sick of listening to me during the storm with different constituents around about Lagan Valley. So we appreciate that. You've covered so much. Actually, you've covered a lot of the communication to us. I found really, really great. I suppose the communication to the public is the bit where we were then getting it from the public, and you've talked about that. I suppose whenever that report and that review happens, if that can come through to ourselves, that would be great. The only just one thing just to pick up on, you've talked about SLAs. I had to Google what SLA is. Everybody talks in riddles in here. So, but who needs to lead on that? I'm guessing that's a service agreement. Is it a service level agreement? Or but who needs to lead on that? Is that something the department needs to do, or is that something that comes from the bodies themselves?
So the SLAs within Project Stratum would have been derived from BDUK and DCIT and the DFE. And they would have been set out as key metrics that we needed to follow in relation to things such as installation, service restoration, and so on and so forth. So, as I said, those SLAs that are currently in place, up until the storm, I can say that pretty much every single metric that we've been measured against from the first month of Project Stratum right the way through, we've adhered to, including service restoration when customers have issues.
What is the bit you're asking for there? You're saying that you need
that'll be within the OpenReach infrastructure, David. So at the minute, the PIA product that we use for OpenReach, there are no service level agreements, formalised service level agreements. May that be for us to use a pool to build or to use a pool to maintain or provide service. We do have a very close working relationship with the senior team and their operational team, and during the storm we were in daily calls. What we're looking to do now, William's phone. What we're looking to do now, though, along with other alternative providers, is to formalise them agreements and put in place service level agreements that we can both adhere to.
But that comes from yourselves doing it. What I'm just trying to make sure there's nothing in the department that needs
there is a part to play from the department in terms of feeding into the regulator around getting these SLAs in place. We're competitors of OpenReach as well as consume products from them, and we all will make our submissions. But in terms of policy, it makes absolute sense that there's service level agreements around pools and ducts, and then that means the likes of Fibrus can sign up to automatic compensation schemes, and then we're not having the same type of conversation.
So all I'm trying to get at is, when does that start? Who puts that in front of you, or does that need to come from the Department of Economy, or does that need to come from yourselves?
So the next review of the communications that Ofcom's is later on this year. They're in pre-consultation stage, but it's something the department should really be starting to sort out now to make that submission once the consultation is launched.
Perfect. Again, as everybody's said, thank you for your work and the engineers on the ground that actually brought all our guys back. So thank you.
William Irwin, broadcast and turn William Irwin back on, please. We're still waiting on them turning you on. Clearly, Fibrus don't provide the internet here. There you are, William.
Okay, now?
Yes, sir.
William.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and can I thank Fibrus for their update. I mean, I was involved in an earlier party update, which was useful, and I accept that there are issues. There were issues for Fibrus in and around infrastructure. OpenReach, there was poles down, which you were not in control of and had to wait. But I had one particular issue in Ridge Hill Village, just a few hundred yards from my own office, where everyone in the village right around this guy, this family was on, he was off. One would have thought it had been quite easy repaired because there was no infrastructure issues, but it took 33 days to get him back on, and he needed someone for his work. You can understand the frustration. Yes. And the fact that he was 300 metres from my office, he was quite a regular visitor.
Use your Wi-Fi, William.
Hey, right enough.
Yeah. But why was the no, it had been quite easy. Obviously, whenever he was the only one off, there was minor issues involved. Why was those minor ones not repaired sooner?
Well, I suppose the approach we took, William, first and foremost, was to try and get as many customers fixed for every fault that we had, and that was priority. Unless there was vulnerable customers or particular business customers that came to us and told us about it, either through directly with ourselves or through the elected reps. And unfortunately, for this person, it seems like they were single fault and amongst others, and unfortunately they would have been down the list in terms of priority because it was a single fault. But after 4 weeks, we had all of our access network fixed, and then we were down to individual service calls, and we quickly got through them. Is there anything else to add to that?
No, I think that explains the response in terms of going for the major outages and into singletons. And it is unfortunate that not everyone can be prioritised, William, but understand the frustration from the customer's perspective.
One would have thought that one engineer could repair that. They didn't need a team of engineers to repair those minor individual houses. So why were they not prioritised with a single engineer could have repaired those, in my mind?
Yeah.
It was a coordinated response in terms of how we mobilise our engineers. So we mobilise into, I suppose, the core network, then into the PON network, and then into the distribution network. I take your feedback on board, but unfortunately, given the scale of this storm, we had to apply the coordinated response as per our business continuity plan.
And I think if I could come in there, William, in that particular case, I understand your frustrations on that particular customer's frustrations, but if you can share that information as a follow-up with us, we can come back with a detailed response in terms of the reasoning behind it and what we're going to do to resolve.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, William.
Okay, thank you very much, firstly, for coming along here today. And listen, I think all members come from the perspective that they understand the difficulties that you were facing, but as the modern world, internet's a vital connectivity tool, and people don't get quite as irate as if they lose their internet connection. But I think there is something very special about the fact that Northern Ireland has the best connectivity anywhere in Europe, and that's being delivered by a homegrown Northern Ireland firm. So I wish you all the best with the continued work on this. Good luck with Project Gigabit. And we look forward to continuing to work with you in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to move to any other business. Over to Patsy.
Chair, we've heard quite a bit here today, so I think it would be very useful if we, with the approval of everyone else here, met with the respective officials at the department who are charged with telecoms, Project Stratum, and have an oversight because they are the management oversight department of the project, and to see what could have been learned here today. And indeed there were a few suggestions from Fibrus about other issues too. That's okay.
Members content with that?
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other relevant business?
Just the impact of that suggestion could maybe not necessarily attend the meeting, but given that DERA part funded as well, be.
That's what I'm suggesting, Dick, if that's.
From DERA as well.
Officials from both DERA and DFA.
Maybe have a joint meeting if that's okay.
Right. I thought you just meant economy, but I thought.
No, just similar format to today if that's okay.
Fair enough, everyone?
Aye.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much for your attendance, and see you soon.
That's us.
I was saying we not have committee this week.
Senate Chamber. Sound